Over the last few hours, it's become increasingly clear that the situation in Kazakhstan is starting to stabilize, though it remains tense. Anti-government protests continue in some areas of the country, especially the western oil-producing regions near the Caspian Sea, but it seems that the situation in the former capital, Almaty, still Kazakhstan's biggest city, the situation there seems to be now relatively stable and under control, with the military and security forces having essentially regained control. In the meantime, we've been hearing more information, getting more information about the deployment of Russian and allied troops to Kazakhstan. They've been arriving in the country following the request for help from the Kazakh president to the Collective Security Treaty Organization, of which Kazakhstan is a member and which is led by Russia. And the Russians and the other member states of the Collective Security Treaty Organization responded rapidly to this request from the Kazakh president, and those Russian troops are now arriving in Kazakhstan. I understand from Russian reports that most of them will be positioned to defend government buildings and installations. Not quite clear where that is going to be, whether it's going to be in the capital, Nur-Sultan, or in Almaty itself. Of course, if it includes Almaty, as I suspect it will, then the residents of that city will see Russian troops in their city protecting the main residential buildings. They will also see Russian troops if they decide to fly out of their country, because we learn that Russian troops are also helping to secure Almaty airport. They're increasingly stationed there also. So the situation seems to be getting stable, and it's clear that Russia is playing the leading role in bringing the situation in Almaty under control, in Kazakhstan under control. But the other major Eurasian power, the other big Eurasian power, China, has also weighed in. And there's now been a telephone call. The official Chinese news agency Xinhua has provided us details, a readout of a telephone call between the president of China, Xi Jinping, and the Kazakh president, President Kasim Tokayev. And this is what the Chinese readout of this call says. And it says the following. Chinese President Xi Jinping on Friday sent a verbal message to Kazakh President Kasim Tokayev over the recent large-scale riots in Kazakhstan. Noting that the riots have caused heavy casualties and property losses, Xi expressed his sincere sympathies to President Tokayev in the message. He said President Tokayev has taken decisive and effective actions at a critical moment, quickly calming the situation, which has shown his sense of responsibility as a statesman and demonstrated a highly responsible attitude to the country and the people. China, Xi said, firmly opposes any force undermining Kazakhstan's stability, threatening the country's security and sabotaging the peaceful life of the Kazakh people. Furthermore, China strongly rejects any attempt by external forces to provoke unrest and instigate color revolutions in Kazakhstan, as well as any attempt to harm the friendship between China and Kazakhstan and disrupt the two countries' cooperation. Xi said China, as a fraternal neighbor and permanent, comprehensive strategic partner of Kazakhstan, is ready to provide necessary support to help it overcome the difficulties. No matter what risks and challenges get in the way, China will always remain as a trustworthy friend and reliable partner of Kazakhstan, and the Chinese people will forever stand with the Kazakh people. Well, that is an extremely strong statement of support from the Chinese president. Now, I'm going to say straight away that there's an awful lot been going on diplomatically over the course of this conflict situation in Kazakhstan, and we can only see the surface. We only know about, for example, this request for help from the Kazakh president to the Collective Security Treaty Organization, in effect to Moscow. We only know about the Russian decision to send troops in response to that call to Kazakhstan under the umbrella of the Collective Security Treaty Organization. And we only know about this particular conversation between Tokayev and Xi Jinping, because that's, of course, we've been provided with a readout of it by Xinhua. But undoubtedly, an awful lot more has been going on that we are not informed about. It is, I think, a certainty that over the last few hours there have been numerous calls between Moscow and Nur-Sultan, the capital of Kazakhstan. Almost certainly there's been extensive discussions between Putin and Tokayev, probably between Putin and the former president Nazarbayev, who has now been shuffled off the scene, probably forever. And undoubtedly also there have been calls between Moscow and Beijing, and discussions about the situation between Moscow and Beijing, and very probably there's been more contacts between Beijing and Nur-Sultan, between the Chinese and Kazakh governments, that we have not been informed about. I've already expressed my view that there's been something of a power struggle within Kazakhstan, within the Kazakh government, between the Kazakh President Tokayev, and his predecessor, Nazarbayev, who was clinging on as head of the security forces through his position as chairman of the Security Council. And it's clear that the Russians have been backing Tokayev, and it is clear that Tokayev has been able, as a result, to sideline Nazarbayev and strip him of all his positions. And I have to say that I wonder, and I strongly suspect, that part of the purpose of deploying Russian troops to Kazakhstan has been to signal to the officials of the Kazakh government and to the military in Kazakhstan that Tokayev, not Nazarbayev, has Russia's backing, and that for that reason they should comply, they should obey Tokayev's orders. So I suspect there's been an awful lot going on of that sort, and I'm pretty sure there are some very senior Russian officials currently in Kazakhstan, in the capital Nur-Sultan, definitely engaging in direct conversations with Tokayev and his other officials, and also probably with Nazarbayev as well. And in fact, there's been rumors circulating that Nazarbayev has actually left the country, and in which case it's highly likely he's actually in Russia now. So I suspect there's been active Russian diplomacy on the ground in Kazakhstan, and I suspect that this decision by Tokayev to call on the Collective Security Treaty Organization for help was choreographed with the Russians, but also, I suspect, with the Chinese also. And we see from this conversation, from this readout, the extent to which the Chinese are backing all the moves which have been made. We see that Xi Jinping talks about the decisive and effective actions at a critical moment which Tokayev took, which calmed the situation, and about how Tokayev has shown a sense of responsibility as a statesman. Now that looks to me like an endorsement of Tokayev's decision to turn to the Collective Security Treaty Organization for military help, and it also is obviously an endorsement of Tokayev's decision to deploy the military, the Kazakh military, to suppress the various uprisings that have been taking place around the country, but most specifically in Almaty, the former capital. But then consider the other things that Xi Jinping says. He talks about how China firmly opposes any force undermining Kazakhstan's stability and threatening the country's security, and that China strongly rejects any attempt by external forces to provoke unrest and instigate color revolutions in Kazakhstan, as well as any attempt to harm the friendship between China and Kazakhstan and disrupt the two countries' cooperation. Now, the reference to external forces, in effect, supports Tokayev's claim that what has been happening in Kazakhstan has been an externally driven attempt at regime change. So Xi Jinping is endorsing that view. But the reference to color revolutions in this readout, in effect, says that the Chinese believe that the instigators of this unrest in Kazakhstan were the Western powers, ultimately the United States. And then note specifically the particular comments that China will resist any attempt to harm the friendship between China and Kazakhstan and disrupt the two countries' cooperation. Now, what does Xi Jinping refer to here? Well, you only have to look at the map to understand what he means. Kazakhstan has a border with China, not just a border with China, but a border with Western China, specifically with that region in China that I'm not going to name because of YouTube's concerns when I do, but which is that region where all that unrest has been happening and about which so many people in the West have been expressing concerns. And there's been reports circulating in Kazakhstan and now in the Russian media as well, that at least some of the people who were involved in some of this unrest, especially in Almaty, were people with jihadi militant views. And of course, that does rather look as if they are the sort of people who, if they'd succeeded in toppling the government, the Kazakh government, might have been prepared to provide a base area or support for the insurgency that the Chinese have been dealing with in that very same region of Western China. So for the Chinese, this is an extremely sensitive issue. They are determined to see Kazakhstan remain stable, and therefore they commend Tokayev's decision to deploy the army, to crush the uprising, and to call on Russia for support. And notice also, see, talking about Kazakhstan being a fraternal neighbor and permanent comprehensive strategic partner. That, of course, refers also to Kazakhstan's pivotal role in the Eurasian institutions and in the Belt and Road Initiative and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. The Chinese will not want to see anything that will put that in jeopardy. So an incredibly strong statement of support from the Chinese to the Kazakh government and a strong endorsement of the actions that have been taken both by Kazakhstan itself, by the government of Kazakhstan, but also by Russia, China's de facto ally, Russia, to stabilize the situation in Kazakhstan. But note that China also stands ready to take action, and the resounding final paragraph: no matter what risks and challenges get in the way, China will always remain as a trustworthy friend and reliable partner of Kazakhstan, and the Chinese people will forever stand with the Kazakh people. That's a resounding statement of support, and it does imply, note the particular reference to risks and challenges, that the Chinese are prepared to take action on the ground, that they're prepared to become involved in stabilizing the situation in Kazakhstan, probably or presumably not so much by deploying troops to the country, but certainly through other means, economic aid or whatever is needed to help Kazakhstan through its present crisis. I would add, by the way, that Kazakhstan doesn't seem to be a country which, as far as I can see, is in any great need of economic aid at the moment. Not only is it immensely rich in terms of its natural resources, but it has a sovereign wealth fund that it amounts to, that is in percentage terms, is as big as 1/3 of the country's GDP. So the Kazakh government has huge funds it could, in theory, deploy to help stabilize the situation in the country. And I'm sure that over the next few weeks and months, that sovereign wealth fund will be used in exactly that way. Anyway, so that's an incredibly strong statement from Xi Jinping. And of course, he is China's leader, and one has to take that very seriously. But there's also been articles about the situation in Kazakhstan in Global Times, and Global Times has gone beyond some of the things that Xi Jinping has said, and it has made explicitly clear China's backing for Russia's intervention under the umbrella of the Collective Security Treaty Organization in Kazakhstan. And the article reads, Kazakhstan restoring order with help of CSTO's deployment against invasion by gangs trained from abroad. And then the subtitle goes on to say, CSTO's military deployment legitimate, necessary to deter extremists, outside forces with evil ambitions. And then the article then goes on to read, with constitutional order in Kazakhstan about to be restored after the government took firm measures to deal with the unrest, which has engulfed half of the country for a few days, and the arrival of troops from the Collective Security Treaty Organization, the US and West rushed to take the chance to play geopolitical tricks by questioning the legitimacy of CSTO's deployment and hyping the Russian threat in an attempt to squeeze its influence in Central Asia. On Friday, Chinese President Xi Jinping sent condolences to Kazakh President Tokayev for the severe casualties and losses from the unrest. Xi said that Tokayev took affirmative and effective measures at a crucial time, quickly quelled the situation, and showed a statesman's responsibility to the country and its people. And then the article goes on to discuss the conversation between Xi Jinping and Tokayev, which I've just discussed myself. And then it goes on to say the following. The counter-terrorism operation in Kazakhstan has been raised to critical red on Friday. Over 3,000 people have been detained in Kazakhstan in connection with the riots. 26 armed rioters have been killed and 18 were injured in clashes with security forces, state run broadcaster Habar 24 reported on Friday, citing a source from the Interior Ministry. Analysts noted that CSTO's military deployment is not only legitimate, but also necessary to deter evil terrorist and extremist forces and outside forces that seek benefits from the unrest. They also suggested closer coordination and cooperation between the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and the CSTO to defend regional stability. That's an extremely important sentence. We'll come to it shortly. The unrest, which started as a protest of fuel price hikes in the Mangistau region on January 2nd, before spreading to half the country in the following days, seemed to be close to an end, despite gunshots being heard in Almaty in the early morning hours of Friday. Many countries, including the US and Russia and the EU bloc, have been closely monitoring the situation in Kazakhstan. But after CSTO agreed to deploy troops to help Kazakhstan, the US, together with the Western media, quickly stood up to question the legitimacy of the military deployment and Russia's involvement in the situation. That decision by the CSTO to deploy military forces is legitimate, as it was written in the document of the treaty that CSTO could take actions when faced with threats to national security and sovereignty of member states. Yang Xin, an associate research fellow at the Institute of Russian, Eastern European and Central Asian Studies at the Chinese Academy of Social Sciences, told Global Times. Representing the government, Kazakh President Tokayev made the request to the CSTO Collective Security Council, and the decision was made after a full discussion by member states, Yang said, noting that the decision to deploy military forces is not made by one country, but member states as a whole. A statement released by the CSTO on Thursday said the CSTO Secretariat confirmed the receipt of an appeal for assistance by the Republic of Kazakhstan. The appeal states that this situation is seen as an invasion by gangs trained from abroad. One purpose for CSTO is set to defend the regional stability, and it responded quickly to Kazakhstan's appeal, because if the riots were not effectively curbed, they would have not only severely destabilized Kazakhstan, but also the entire region, and the longer they carried on, the deeper outside forces could get involved. The latest developments of the chaos have been manifested with signs of color revolutions, while the West and the US are eager to use the opportunity to weaken Russia's influence in Central Asia, Yang said, noting that by deploying troops, CSTO also wanted to deter outside forces and the terrorist forces that want to seek benefits from the current situation. Yang noted that videos on the chaos uploaded online showcased how dangerous the situation, the threats had become, with weapons being handed to demonstrators and clashes with police seemingly organized. The initially peaceful protests quickly turned radical, especially in Almaty, with demonstrators storming administrative institutions, setting fire to cars and buildings, and confronting the police. Videos show beaten soldiers who were left behind and some people driving cars into officers. One police officer was reportedly found beheaded in the unrest. Andrei Kortunov, director of the Russian International Affairs Council, wrote to Global Times that the decision of Russia and its Central Asian allies to meet the request of the Kazakhstan authorities and provide military assistance is an important gesture of political support and solidarity. If it turns out that there is indeed an infiltration of extremist and terrorist groups from abroad, and international cooperation in suppressing such groups may become critically important, Kortunov said. Moreover, Pan Guan, director of the Center of Shanghai Cooperation Organization Studies of the Shanghai Academy of Social Sciences, told Global Times that it is impossible that extremists could have been involved. He pointed out that during a similar incident, protests and later clashes between police officers and local workers in the Mangistau region over salaries in 2011, a religious extremist organization was found to be behind some radical actions. Detailed information on the forces behind the current chaos in Kazakhstan has not been disclosed, but forces promoting separatism, terrorism and extremism may have been involved. On Friday, Kazakh's President Tokayev said the constitutional order in Kazakhstan had been restored and the situation was under control. The troops from the CSTO have arrived and are helping to restore order. Although the situation in Kazakhstan is under control, the unrest will have more impacts. It has destroyed the image of Kazakhstan as a stable country and proved to both Kazakhstan and regional countries that stability and security in the region is still fragile. Out of concern for security and political needs, countries in Central Asia may work towards closer relations with Russia and be more alert for interference from the United States and the West, whilst the United States and the West may pour more money and efforts into these areas to compete with Russia and China, Yang said. Moreover, as Kazakhstan and many Central Asian countries are also members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, SCO member states could also strengthen cooperation on countering dangerous forces and defending regional stability, Yang said. In response to questions on what the SCO could do for Kazakhstan, an SCO member, Chinese Foreign Ministry spokesperson Wang Wenbin, told a press conference on Friday that China and other SCO members are closely monitoring the situation in Kazakhstan and believe it can properly deal with the problems. We also support Kazakhstan to stabilize the situation and are willing to promote the SCO to play a positive role, said Wang, noting that China supports all efforts that would help Kazakhstan to quell the situation and firmly opposes outside forces that incite social disturbance and violence in Kazakhstan. Pan noted that stability in Kazakhstan will also influence China's northwest region, especially, and now he mentions that region in China, whose name I'm going to avoid saying because of YouTube concerns. It is worrisome on whether the chaos in Kazakhstan will spill over into other countries in Central Asia, as outside forces and extremism could infiltrate the region via the internet and incite trouble through videos and words. We need to closely monitor all changes in the region, including in Afghanistan, said Pan. So, the Chinese strongly supporting the decision by the Russians and the Collective Security Treaty Organization to intervene to stabilize the situation in Kazakhstan. The Chinese ridiculing the attempts made by some Western countries, including the US White House spokesperson Jen Psaki, to cast doubt on the legitimacy of the Russian intervention in Kazakhstan. By the way, the Chinese are absolutely right about this. There is no doubt at all about the legality and legitimacy of this intervention, which was requested by the legitimate Kazakh government. But anyway, the Chinese making clear that they back this intervention. The Chinese, however, also making an important further point, which is that maybe the time has come for the Shanghai Cooperation Organization to take a more active role in promoting stability in Central Asia, and the vehicle that it might use to achieve that could be the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Now, at this point, it's important to make certain points, which I've actually made in previous programs, about these two organizations. There are numerous institutions, organizations, so groupings of states that are emerging in Central Asia, in Eurasia, as the Russians and the Chinese gradually build this structure, this network of alliances, institutions, and organizations, which together will provide the links binding this Eurasia that they are creating. Amongst them is the Collective Security Treaty Organization. Now, that is a military alliance, and it's led by Russia, and it consists of various former Soviet states. So it's Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzia, Tajikistan, and Armenia. China is not a member because it was not, obviously, part of the Soviet Union. However, following recent military exercises and drills between the Russian and Chinese militaries, and after the Chinese and Russian armed forces started joint patrols in the Northeast Pacific, the Chinese obtained observer status within the Collective Security Treaty Organization. This all happened at a summit meeting in Dushanbe in the autumn, which was attended, by the way, by Xi Jinping, which brought together both all the states of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, but within which the Collective Security Treaty Organization, all of whose members are also members of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, at this very same summit, within the context of this Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, the member states of the Collective Security Treaty Organization also had a summit meeting of their own, which Putin chaired. Now, Xi Jinping attended that meeting of the CSTO, even though China is not officially a part of it. And it's increasingly clear that the Chinese are starting to see the Collective Security Treaty Organization as a kind of enforcement military arm to the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. So you have the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is the umbrella association which brings together all the various Eurasian states, China and Russia, and which is the umbrella organization. And below it, there is the Eurasian Economic Community, led by Russia, the Collective Security Treaty Organization, led by Russia, and then there is the Belt and Road Initiative, which is, of course, led by China. And all of these structures are gradually being bound together. Now, what this article says, what that conversation between Tokayev and Xi Jinping hints at, is that the Chinese, clearly alarmed by what happened in Kazakhstan, a country that they had up to now assumed was stable, that the Chinese want to see the Collective Security Treaty Organization playing a more active role in Central Asia to keep the situation in Central Asia stable, and that China, via the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and via its position as, in effect, an observer, a kind of de facto member of the Collective Security Treaty Organization, that China is also prepared to play a role. And that is very interesting in itself. But notice again that this Global Times article once more refers to the West, it refers to the United States, it refers to colour revolutions. It makes it quite obvious that the Chinese believe that the United States and the West had a hand in the unrest in Kazakhstan. And notice also that the article also specifically refers to the risks to China itself. It draws attention to the fact that Kazakhstan has a border with China and that it adjoins that northwest region of China that I've been talking about. That I've been talking about. So we see Chinese concerns, the sort of steps the Chinese are going to take in future in collaboration with the Russians to keep Central Asia stable. And we see also, of course, the Chinese providing unequivocal backing to Kazakhstan, to the government there, but also to Russia as a result of the steps that have been taken to stabilize the position. Anyway, what this affair in Kazakhstan has done is that it has made Kazakhstan more dependent on Russia, more likely to pursue integration policies within the Eurasian Economic Union and the Collective Security Treaty Organization with Russia. And it's going to make the Chinese and the Russians intensify their policy of binding together the various Eurasian states in the kind of bloc that has been discussed and which has been for such a long time a work in progress. It has brought colour revolution, if you like, or if not colour revolution, then at least an attempt at regime change to one of the most sensitive areas on China's border. The Chinese, predictably, are reacting strongly. You could expect them to react as strongly about what happens in Central Asia as the Russians are reacting, for example, to what has happened in Ukraine. The Chinese are looking for allies. They're looking to Moscow, and they're going to press forward from now on, or so it seems to me, to make sure that colour revolutions, regime change operations, establishment of jihadi groups in Central Asia, this area of critical importance for China's security, that none of this happens. Well, I don't know to what extent what happened in Kazakhstan was a regime change operation and what the role of the United States and the West was in trying to carry out what was a regime change operation. I'm not sure of the exact nature of the American role. But what I will say is this: if this was a Western-inspired attempt to create trouble in Russia's backyard in Central Asia, almost certainly it has achieved the opposite. It has replaced in Kazakhstan a president, a former leader, Nazarbayev, who wanted to maintain some kind of distance from Moscow, with a new leader, Tokayev, who is clearly now determined to integrate more deeply with Moscow because he's more dependent on the Russians. It's brought Russian troops into a key Central Asian country, and it has deeply alarmed the Chinese and made the Chinese even more determined to reinforce the steps the Russians are taking in Central Asia. As I said, if this was a Western-inspired regime change attempt, then it was astonishingly ill-judged, and it has achieved the opposite of what presumably it was intended to do. Well, thank you for listening to this program. I look forward to you joining me again in future programs on this channel and on our main channel, the Duran, where I do programs with my colleague and friend, Alex Christoforou. Please also remember to check us out on Locals, where we have a thriving community, where we publish increasing amounts of exclusive content, where our community also publishes content, and where I now do regular live streams at 1900 hours, at 1400 hours EST every Wednesday, 1900 hours London time. Just to repeat those times again, 1400 hours Eastern Standard Time on Wednesday, 1900 hours London time on Wednesday. And you can also find us on many other platforms, on BitChute, Library, ODYSEE, the new free speech platform, SuperU, and of course Rumble. And you can support us via Patreon and Subscribestar, and by going to our shop and buying yourself the amazing things you will find there, like our great magic mugs, including this wonderful new Good Day mug. And of course, you can also support us by ticking the like button to this video if you've liked the video, and by checking your subscription to this channel. Thank you for joining me again today. I look forward to you joining me again soon in future programs on this channel and on our other channels and platforms, and have a good day until then.